Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Now, that's just kind of an upside down thing if you think about it. Blessed are you when you're crying. Blessed are you when you're grieving and mourning. Blessed are you when your heart is so full with the realities of loss, where your heart is just breaking. That just is upside down kind of thinking. Blessed. I'm blessed in my grief, in my loss. One of the frustrating things for me as a pastor is the attitude by the world around that says, Christians, they're supposed to be happy all the time. Christians are supposed to be full of joy wherever they go, all times, all places. But let's be honest, even here this morning, some of you, as you celebrate Mother's Day, if you were honest, you would say, my heart is churning. It's full of anxiety and stress. And some of you are grieving profoundly. What is grief? Grief is all about mourning loss. And it's not necessarily about, the loss of a loved one. My father, as he grows older, he struggles. He's got his cane now, and he struggles to rock himself out of that chair, and he's got Parkinson's disease, and he grieves the loss of his physical agility. Some of you here this morning, you're grieving something. You might look back over the years and you regret a few things and you mourn. You might have lost a job, or you might have lost in terms of a relationship. Whatever your hurt, your heartache this morning, Jesus says, blessed are you, for you will be comforted. God doesn't expect me to be happy all the time. In fact, in Ecclesiastes it says there's a time and a season for everything, season for every activity under heaven. There's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. There is a season, a time and a place for this experience known as grief. Grief is good. Grief is an acknowledgement that we live in a world of brokenness and heartache and sadness. I mean, there's a lot of things to celebrate in life. There's a lot of joys. Here we celebrate motherhood. There's a lot of wonderful things that bring gladness to our hearts. You walk outside, you see the changes that are taking place due to the new season of spring. I lived down in Florida for a time, and it just seemed weird. You just went from dark green to a little lighter green to a little lighter green to back to dark green again, Here in Iowa, you really appreciate the change of season, You really, when you experience a long winter where it's cold and you got all that snow, and finally, the snow begins to melt, and then you might go out to the river's edge and you start seeing the ice break up, and then pretty soon you go out another week and you start seeing the buds on the trees. Pretty soon you see that first robin. You see signs that there's life, there's hope. We have those seasons, and thank God for the seasons. And through it all, God travels with us. It's important for us to embrace every season, I think. When we mourn, when we grieve, we know just around the corner, God is there. He's with us through that, even though we may not recognize it, but He's there. And He's saying there's a new season. It's a season of comfort and joy. A lot of people, do one of three things, I think. They live in a state of denial, denying the reality of grief. And that comes in the form of repression and suppression, thinking that if I just block it out, then I won't feel the pain. We struggle with grief at times. We just don't want to walk that lonely road. But I want to encourage you this morning to go there. It's important for you to let it out, because if you don't let it out, unhealthy things will happen. You'll begin to act out. You just got to come to that point of brokenness, acknowledging that there's just things that are beyond your ability to reason. There are things beyond your ability to manage, and that you desperately need the power of God to enter in and transform everything. We are called to grieve. It says in Psalm 34, verse 18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he saves those whose spirits have been crushed. You got to look around for those signs where God is around to remind you that he's not far away. I'm going to invite Tylene Woods to come up here and share about, in a time of loss, she saw a sign of God's holy presence and grace.
I'm going to start out by reading you the legend of the first robin. One day, long ago, a little bird in Galilee saw a large crowd gathered around a man carrying a heavy wooden cross. On the man's head was a crown made from a thorn branch. The thorns were long and sharp. The little bird saw that the thorns were hurting the man. It wanted to help him, so it flew down and took the longest, sharpest thorn in its tiny beak. The bird tugged and pulled until the thorns snapped from the branch. Then a strange thing happened. A drop of blood fell onto the bird's breast, staining it bright red. The stain never went away, and so today the robin proudly wears a red breast because it helped a man named Jesus. When my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer in 2006, I should say our mother, Babs is here today, it was devastating news for my family. The questions flooded our minds and hearts. Why? Why her? My mother's response was, why not me? My mother had a strong faith indeed. Shortly after that dreadful day at St. Luke's, a robin began appearing at my parents' living room picture window. Not just appearing, but slamming into the section of the window where my mother always sat. The robin also slammed into the window above the kitchen sink, also where my mother would be found. Oh, my mother cursed that pesky robin and the mess it left on that section of window. We could barely see out the window after a few days. What on earth was going on, we asked. Then my father shared with his daughters that after receiving the diagnosis, he prayed a prayer of lament, asking God to give him a sign. Shortly after his prayer and the robin appearances, my father received an email from a family friend. It was the legend of the first robin. We all wept. Knowing that this was indeed the sign my father had prayed for. Jesus was with us and with my mother. My father shared with my mother the email, But she dismissed it and continued to be annoyed with that pesky robin. But you see, that sign was not meant for her. It was meant for my father. A few weeks later, we trekked off to Mayo Clinic where my mother received treatment. She was there for several weeks, and her daughters took turns staying in a motel and being with our mother and father. During her stay at Mayo Clinic, the family friend who sent the email visited. My father questioned him about the email containing the legend of the first robin. The friend had no recollection of sending the email. After my mother left her chair by the window, the robin disappeared. The younger grandchildren saw the robin as a sign that Jesus would heal their grandmother. For me, it was a sign that Jesus was coming to take her to heaven. 8 months later, she indeed went to be with Jesus. She was able to return home for a few months, and the Lord took her before the final stages of the cancer with a blood clot on the morning of December 9th. God does indeed answer prayers. Happy Mother's Day, Mom.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Tylene. God heals broken hearts. Whatever you're going through, whatever challenges, if you've had to go through that lonesome valley of mourning the loss of a loved one, or you're just plain frustrated with the issues of life. I've got something in my backyard I'm working on. I got one of these kits that, supposed to be simple and easy. And beside that, if I had the people at Sam's Club come over and put this thing together, it cost me another $400. So I thought, well, this is going to be therapeutic. I'm going to just do it on my own. But I'm willing to pay $600 to have somebody come and finish the job because things aren't connecting right like I anticipated. What I thought would be therapeutic has become a burden. That's life. That's life. Things don't always work out as you hope. But somehow, some way, if you just have the eyes of faith, you begin to see things. You begin to see how God is working through it. I've encouraged you to read the Psalms. The Psalms really connect with the human experience. I mean, all of those emotions that go up and down and all around. Emotions of joy and hope. Emotions of anger and frustration. It's raw and real, and it relates to what you and I often go through. We quote the 23rd Psalm. Here's a portion of that psalm. Even though I walk through the valley of the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. That's a strange thing. God's rod and staff. How does that bring comfort? Well, you think of the shepherd out in his fields, tending his flocks. The Lord is my shepherd. He's there with his rod and staff. How does he utilize that rod and staff? He uses that rod to offer protection against the wild animals. He utilizes that rod once in a while to actually discipline us, discipline his sheep, when we get into trouble. And he uses that rod and staff to help guide the sheep back onto the right track, the right path. And if he has to, when his sheep have gone way off the path and they're bleeding and they're crying out, he responds and he offers his staff as a way of rescue to take us back home. I want you to just meditate on that imagery. He protects me from trouble. It says in Psalm 32, verse 7, you are my hiding place. You will protect me from my trouble. He didn't say, you will keep me from my trouble. He says, you will protect me from my trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. I used to hear this saying often shared with great, holiness, that the safest place to be is at the center of God's will. I heard a gentleman by the name of Erwin McManus share about trying to explain 9/11 to his daughter. She didn't understand why those people had to suffer such a tragedy, over 3,000 lives being killed, and trying to make sense of such a hateful act. And he said to his daughter that, it's just not true. The safest place is not necessarily in terms of a worldly point of view. The safest place is not to be at the center of God's will, because look where it got Jesus. Jesus was at the very center of God's will, and he ended up on a cross. I'm telling you, Christian friends, that there is no guarantee in this life that you won't have to travel that lonesome road of suffering and abuse and affliction, sickness and disease. The Bible even says it quite clearly. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you go through troubles. The issue is going through them, trusting in God each and every step of the way. God offers his protective hand through it all. But I can't guarantee you that you're forever going to be safe physically speaking. What I can guarantee you is that the real you will always be safe and secure. The real you is your soul. If you trust in Christ, Christ alone for your salvation, your soul forever, forever, forever belongs to him. And so from that perspective, you don't walk in fear, you walk in faith, whatever may come. Now, he does deliver people physically from harm's way as they carry out the Lord's business. Like Paul, he went on all kinds of missionary journeys. And along the way, he would make provision for his protection as Paul is carrying out God's mission in the world. You know, the reason why you're on this planet, as long as you got breath in your body, it's for the purpose of carrying out his purposes. And as long as he's got a mission and a plan for you in this world, he's going to provide that protection along the way. In the form that it may come, we don't worry about it. We just trust in him. We trust in faith. He's the good shepherd. He's going to protect his sheep somehow, some way. Either as we live out his purposes in this world or in the hereafter. He's going to rescue the real you. The real you is the one that lives. Your flesh and body deteriorates, but the real you lives on forever and ever through faith in him. He disciplines me when I get into trouble. Sometimes God allows some things to enter our world for our character development. Psalm 19, verse 12 through 13. Blessed is the one you discipline, Lord, the one you teach from your law. You grant them relief from days of trouble. God often uses our pain to get our attention. Someone just made a comment, a lot of times, I think it was Jack when I came in here, how people gravitate and seek out the church in a time of loss. Why is that? Well, better late than never, I guess. But better now than forever walking in anxiety and fear. God sometimes allows pain to just wake us up and shake us. C.S. Lewis wrote, God whispers to us in our pleasure, but he shouts to us in our pain. How is God shouting out to you right now? Has he got your attention? He wants your heart. He wants you to walk with him along that path that leads to life. He guides me to the right paths for my life. Psalm 23:3, he renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. He's got a plan, a purpose for your life. And sometimes you veer off that purpose, that pathway. But fear not, you can turn your heart to him and he'll rescue. He rescues me when I cry out for him. It says in Psalm 88, verses 1 and 2, Lord, you are the God who saves me. Day and night I cry out to you. May my prayer come before you. Turn your ear to my cry. Is your heart breaking this morning? Is your heart crying out? We've got witnesses that can testify to the saving grace of Jesus Christ through the storm, through the trials, through the pain and suffering, through the loss. I asked Karen Day to come and share today a little bit about her journey, how she has persevered in faith, facing the storms that have recently come upon her family in the form of loss. Karen, why don't you come and share?
I'm not sure I want to be this example. Kylene said, she got something on the email from someone, and I'm going, every once in a while something kind of comes through on Facebook or something that I read, and I'm kind of going, that really kind of clicks with me. The other day something came through that I thought, yeah, that's right. And what it said was, when a train goes through a tunnel, it gets dark. You don't throw away the ticket and jump off. You sit still, trusting the engineer. Trust God today, no matter how dark your situation. God says you're coming out of it. I didn't bring tissues with me. This is going to be a tough one today.
Let the river flow.
It will. A lot of you know some of my story. I grew up in the church. Our family went to church. I'm not sure I really knew what the church was about, other than the fact you got to go to Bible school or camp in the summertime. Every Sunday morning you knew where you're supposed to be, unless you'd come up with a really good excuse not to go. That was my church life. I was a good example of a little girl sitting in church, and when somebody snapped their fingers, I did whatever was supposed to do. Got married, went to college. In my junior year, I got married, finished our college, had a couple kids. Life was kind of uncomfortable for us at the time with careers and things like that. We went to a revival, and both my husband and I went to the altar that night and gave our lives. And there was something different that happened at that time, and I'm thinking, we're good now. And on the way home, it was discussed and considered that he would go into the seminary and become a pastor, which he did. So within a matter of about 3 or 4 months, we went from living in my parents' old house to him going to seminary and being assigned to church. That was pretty quick. He had a 2-point charge. He was there. The kids and I stayed there while he went to seminary back and forth. Things were good. We have this. We got the answers now. We're walking God's way. We're doing what God wants us to do. All is good. I was very comfortable with our life. However, 15 years later, my husband asked for a divorce. And I must admit, I was kind of a divorce snob, kind of thinking, why can't, this doesn't make sense. What I learned through that process is that you're not always in charge of your life. Sometimes other people are, and one person cannot save a marriage. It takes two people willing to do that. So we were divorced. I'm asking God, why? What did I do? What was wrong? This was supposed to be easy now. I'd given my life to Christ. Why isn't it easy? So I questioned it for a long time, but within a matter of a couple of years, I had moved up to Emmitsburg. I had eventually found another man, remarried, and I used the information that I had gathered through my divorce to help others that were going through divorces. I did workshops and conferences and things to work with them, and so I really used that experience, and so God really blessed me with allowing me to use that experience. So after the remarriage, we had a good life. We had lots of fun. We went lots of places. We did a lot of things. Not all easy, jobs closed and we had to find new jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But all in all, it was a fairly easy walk. And after 25 years, well, my husband was having health issues then. We moved back to Sioux City for a job for me. And my husband was having health issues, and after a while we decided he really couldn't be left alone because we had found him unconscious a couple times, and so we really felt somebody kind of needed to be there. So my son and daughter-in-law and their family moved in with us. One was upstairs, and we lived in the cellar. I keep telling my son we're in the cellar. However, it's a fairly new house. It was built in '93. He redid the basement. It's gorgeous. But we're in the cellar. Anyway, I just want to keep him remembering that. And so they were upstairs. My daughter-in-law was a stay-at-home mother at the time, and so she kept an eye on my husband. And eventually the illnesses took over, and she wanted to go back to work. I ended up retiring. About 3 months after I retired, he passed away. And so as he is dying on the floor, I have my 3-year-old granddaughter with me in the other part of the house, trying to keep things kind of normal while we're waiting for the EMTs to come and get my husband. Her and her brother, there was 3 kids, but the older daughter, she was older, and I didn't have as much time with her because she was in school. But the 2 younger ones were half-time at school and half-time at home. And so we had a life together. The 3 of us made a little family of our own. I had them from about 7 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I got a full night's sleep. I didn't have to deal with bickering and things like that. And so we had a wonderful time. The 3 of us bonded very closely. My grandson would dress up in a suit and take grandma out to eat. My granddaughter, when I was lonely, she'd come down and give me a hug. So there was just a lot of bonding that took place during that time. Eventually, I ended up moving out. I moved into Sioux City, thinking that they needed more room in the house because their kids were getting older. They needed more time with one another, and they were kind of on top of one another upstairs. So I moved into town. And then about 2.5 years ago, the bottom fell out. Everything began to fall out. If I had known then all that was happening now, I'd have left a long time ago. I often hear the phrase, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Not true. He has given me more than I can handle. But he hasn't given me more than I can handle with him. I couldn't do it by myself. I do not believe God causes bad things to happen. I don't think he said my grandson would die in a car accident at this age. I don't think he would say my son was going to lose a leg. God didn't say that. He didn't point a finger and say, this is going to happen to you. I don't think he said I was going to be divorced. But he walks with me through those times when those things happen. And I have seen blessings since then. And I think even though he doesn't cause these things, he causes blessings to happen afterwards. Well, about 2.5 years ago, my son-in-law, John, was diagnosed with cancer and was treated for 6 months. A very aggressive cancer he had. But he came through it. My son was divorced, and these 3 grandkids that have been my life for several years are now living in Pennsylvania. That's a long ways away. About 18 hours, just to give you an idea. 6 months after they left, my granddaughter, my daughter's daughter, who is 14 years old, was diagnosed with cancer. She had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and so she was in treatment for about 5 months up at Sioux Falls. So we spent a lot of time with her up there. The day after she was diagnosed with cancer, my grandson, Hunter, was in a car accident, and 17 hours later, he died. However, God gave us time to bring the family together, and we were all there beside him and with my daughter and her husband when he passed away. We were expecting a miracle. You hear miracles all the time of kids that were in accidents or people that were in accidents, and for some unknown reason, they were healed. My daughter was in seminary, is in seminary. She has churches up in Grettinger and another little town, Carroll, which is up by Spencer, has dedicated her life to the ministry. And yet her son was taken, her 17-year-old son, who was going to school in the morning because he was in swing choir and went in for practice and tangled with the semi, and the semi won. It took us several months before my daughter and I really talked about it, because she was so dealing with her daughter at that time. Kind of filling that empty space, because we were up in Sioux Falls every 3 weeks. But she too said that she was expecting a miracle. She just figured that God would heal him. He'd come back with some wonderful experience of having gone to heaven, and seeing these wonderful things and coming back and telling us that didn't happen. And I must say, it kind of crushed me a little bit, because I really thought God would walk with us. And he has. Don't get me wrong, he has. 5 months later, Reba's, the granddaughter's treatment ended. And she now is getting better. We're seeing changes in her. She is mature way beyond her years, because she's had a couple traumatic events, because it's just the 2 kids. And so her very best friend is gone. Later on that summer last summer, my daughter-in-law broke her knee, and so she was in a cast. My grandson, the one that takes me out on dates, was in a UTV accident and lost 2 fingers on his right hand. But there are blessings. You still use the remote control, and still you play Minecraft, and what's the new one out? The one the kids are playing now. He can still do those because he's got his index finger and his thumb, and he's learned to use the pinky to do that. And then last fall, my daughter-in-law invited me to move back out to our acreage. We got a few acres out there, and I have my mini horses and my sheep out there. And when I moved into town, I really missed them. I really, really enjoy the farm life. I was raised on the farm, and that's who I am. And so I moved back out there, and then in January, my son broke his leg. And if any of you have watched the policeman who has lost his leg here recently, that's my son. But in January, he broke his leg. Of course, he couldn't get around. And so with the animals out there, somebody had to feed them. We had baby lambs coming. We had to water and feed them during the winter. And so I was out there to take care of those jobs. and do the things that need to be done outside to make sure things kept running. And so I said, God got me back out there. You know, at the time I didn't know why. The plans were, and still are, they're just postponed a ways, is that my son's going to build an addition onto their house for the old lady house, okay? So eventually that will happen, but it has definitely been postponed for a while. Well, then in April, he ended up losing his foot. They decided that they could possibly keep it for a year, but he'd probably lose it anyway. And so his choice was, I might as well get it over with and get better. Blessings, yes. We actually found out he's been working with a prosthesist, or whatever you call those guys, but Wally. And he is saying he's going to have my son back up on his feet well, he will be up and running, he said, by July. And so we think that's quite a blessing to have that happening so fast. He's healing wonderfully fast. As a matter of fact, they're taking the stitches out of the amputee area a week early because it's healing so fast. So God is blessing us. And probably one of the hardest things is watching your kids go through pain, and there's nothing you can do about it. I wrapped my arms around my daughter when she lost her son, my first grandchild. And I loved her, but I couldn't take her pain away. When they were little, I had magic kisses, and I could kiss their owie and make it go away. These kisses didn't take owies away. As I look at my son now, and he's got a big owie, it doesn't take the owie away. They both know I love them. They both know they're the world to me. And I would do anything for them, but I can't take their owies away anymore. And I look at this and I think about this and I think, God must hurt too. When God sees us going through pain, I can't help but think, as some of your fathers must think too. I know as a mother how I hurt, and I know fathers hurt too. How can I help this person heal? How can I help my kids? And as God looks down and sees us hurting and sees me crying out to him saying, God, what else? What else can you do to me? What do I need to do? How can I walk with you? What do I need to do? And I know he puts his arms around me and says, I'll walk with you. I'm holding your hands now. I'm walking with you. But as my son was going through all this, and he was up in Sioux Falls for 10 days, one of the first things that came to mind was, what are we going to do? He's going to lose his job. He's a policeman here in Sioux City. He will lose his job. They don't have any amputees. And based on a lot of things that the rules say, it doesn't really allow it at this point. And we were really concerned. You know, were we going to lose our place? Were we going to have to sell? Were we all going to have to move in town? We didn't know. You know, what was he going to do? This was his career. He had done it for 25 years. What was he going to do? Did that mean I was going to have to go back to work? I mean, all these things were going through our minds while he's trying to heal and trying to figure out how is he going to get along without a foot. We're looking at what's next. How are we going to do this? How are we going to pay that mortgage? That might seem like a kind of a dumb thing when kids are losing legs, but at the same point, it was very real to us. Oh Lord, what are we going to do? Well, the brothers and sisters in blue, policemen in Sioux City, are awesome. They have come through and they have blessed us. The captain has come and said he has a job. We believe that Bruce will be back on his feet and he will be out there and there will be a car waiting for him when he's ready to come back. So I will imagine that in another week, maybe 2, he will be back in on light duty, pushing papers, answering phones, whatever it is, something to get him busy. But come July, when he's ready to be up and walking, they will put him back in a car so that he will have his career back. People have been so kind. They've been so supportive of him. People have asked me, doesn't this threaten your faith? Absolutely not. It gives me more faith because I see the blessings that God has given us on the other side. I see a granddaughter who has grown so strong and so deep in her faith. I see a son-in-law who has also gone into the ministry and also has a church assigned. So both my daughter and my son-in-law are both having churches now that they preach at every Sunday. I see a son who has questioned his faith a lot, growing closer and closer to God. And understanding that everything happens for a reason. And another quote that I've heard recently was, everything happens for a reason. Sometimes it hurts, sometimes it's hard, but in the end, all is the best. Never stop trusting God and his divine plan.
Thank you.